My name is Dusty, and I'm a full-time landscape and outdoor photographer based out here in Alberta, Canada, so we have access to some of the best landscapes in the world, at least in my opinion. Today I'm going to show you how to edit landscape images, taking images like this to images like this. I've included the raw files down in the description below, so if you want to download those and follow along with the steps, you're going to be able to learn the most if you're actually following along, so save this video for later if you don't have time right now. Learning Lightroom for me was definitely a tricky feat. I've spent around 7+ years now editing in the platform, so I've learned a lot of ways on how I feel like I can best use the tools available, and it was just from videos like this. I watched other creators doing their workflow, so I'm hoping to bring a no BS kind of guide to exactly how I would choose to edit a landscape image like the one that you're going to see today. Let's jump into Lightroom and I'm going to show you step by step exactly how I got the results that I did. So you'll see my head in the corner, but follow along. All right, here we go. We've got our image here in Lightroom. I'm just going to go along with my exact process how I would attack this photo if I was just to be editing for myself. We've got a beautiful alpine lake here. Sun had just rose, so we've got some fairly bright highlights up above the mountains. Sunrise is just past and the light is starting to pour down into the valley here, and we've got my friend down below, so including a little bit of people into this image as well. And we're going to be trying to exemplify basically the best that we can what the landscape with the person is, and that's going to be our probably main subject, and then secondary subject up here in these beautiful peaks up here catching all of that light. So my first step, what I do almost every single time, depending on if I like the composition, but usually it's just take a little bit of a crop. So I believe I was leveling this in camera, but we will double check to make sure that we have a nice straight image here. But I'm just cropping a little bit. I was shooting fairly wide on this, so I don't need a little bit of this extra detail on the outside here. So I just right away hit into crop, and we are in landscape format. Afterwards, once we get the image close to done or done, we can decide to export it in vertical if we want it for Instagram. But today we're going to be editing this one as a classic landscape image. And we've got our thirds here, so whenever I'm cropping an image, I'm going to be looking at our rule of thirds. So if you don't know the rule of thirds, basically the image is set up into thirds, and often you like to have your focus subject or on these third lines or right in the center. So today we're going to have our one subject kind of just off that bottom right third, and then our basically secondary subject is perfectly fitting into this one. And a lot of this is going to be basically focusing our eyes over to here, so we're not going to be focusing too much detail on the left side of the image. But to me that looks pretty good. I find that lake edges are a little bit tricky just because sometimes they lead away and they're not always exactly flat, so you can't use those to be it. But looking at this line to him, that's fairly straight up and down. So I'm just going to stop there for now. And I'll often use my own personal presets, but today I'm going to just go from scratch. So overall, I underexpose this just to save the highlights. So what we can do a little bit, because I know the detail is there, I'm actually going to raise the exposure first thing just to see what our exposure is starting to look like, and then go to highlights. So I'm going to bring our highlights down to bring that detail back in the sky. Not too crazy, but just enough so that we can bring this overexposed areas back down a little bit so we can see that detail there. On a lot of images, I'll go basically to 95 right away, and especially since that's only targeting this upper area, I'm going to do that one on this one. And then I'm going to touch up our shadows here and bring those up a little bit. I'm going to do a lot of work with masking in this tutorial, so I'm not going to go too crazy with this, but that gives us a fairly nice even exposure there, and a lot of people may be happy with that. So that's quite easy off the start here. I think our contrast is pretty good basically from where we're starting right now because we were in the shadows down here. So I'm going to keep moving on here. Again, we can use our whites to bring down the highlights a little bit, to bring back some of that extra detail in the very exposed areas. So up here in the top right, you can see where my mouse is on the peaks. There's some snow up there and it's reflecting a lot. So I've brought down the whites just a little bit. We can also hit Alt on our keyboard to make the screen go black like this and basically bring them up until we just see a touch of white there. So it was pretty close to where we were. And I will just show you again there. See if I bring it too far to the right, all of the whites go away. And then if I bring it too far to the right, all the whites come up, and we don't want it to be too much on there. That means we're getting overexposed. So I'm going to leave it right about there, kind of where we had it. And I'm going to do the same thing with the blacks. I'm going to hit the Alt key and then move this slider and just want it to be where we can see a couple bit of blacks. If we bring it too far to the right, we're losing that. And if we bring it too far to the left, we're gonna have way too dark of blacks. So that's pretty well exposed, showing that basically right in the middle that we have just a touch there. So I'm gonna bring it up slightly above that. And around that 16 is often where I'm setting my presets at anyways. So that's giving us what the computer is saying is a perfectly kind of exposed image at that point. I'm now going to go on to our temperature, our warmth. We can start by going to auto and see what that's giving us. And actually that gave us a very nice overall kind of warmth to the image and also affected our tint in the greens. So it's a good place to start at auto if the exposure is kind of nothing too crazy. As I said, this was down in a very shadowy valley, so I wanted to bring some of that warmth back in and it brings some of the color into these beautiful larches. And then here, my preferences on texture, clarity, and dehaze. I usually like to bring the clarity down to about a -8 or a -10. Today, let's do -10 because there's a lot of textures in here and I just want to soften that out a little bit. And then dehaze, I often bring up to about a +10, just to bring some of those details in. It affects the color as well as the detail and shadows a little bit differently than clarity does, and I find clarity kind of smooths out our image. And because the images are so sharp from these new cameras, I would like to kind of soften that up a little bit. And then we're gonna go into our vibrance and saturation. I generally bring the saturation down a little bit, or maybe to a -5, and bring our vibrance up probably a +20. They both affect them differently, and I'd actually have to look into the details on how they do it. But when you're adjusting them, you can kind of find a place that you like that kind of suits you and use those accordingly. For me, that's how I do it. And at the end of the image, you'll be able to adjust that a little bit more for final adjustments. For our tone curve, I'm actually going to be skipping that on our image because I have lots of nice contrast and our exposure is really nice already, and I'm going to be doing a lot of adjustments with our masking. But I'm going to move on down to our HSL slider, so hue, saturation, and luminance now. So this is going to be adjusting basically the different temperature color of our colors, the brightness of our colors, and then how colorful our colors are in layman's terms. But we don't have a lot of reds in here, so for our hue, I'm going to leave that one alone. For oranges, I also don't have a lot of orange in here, so I'm going to leave it there. But for yellow, I want to bring those slightly more to the orange side. We don't want to go crazy here, but I'm going to go to about -15. Get a little bit more orange into our larches here, which is more accurate to what they were like in real life. And then in our greens, I'm also going to bring those down a tiny bit to the more yellow side. We want to keep, these are, I believe, either fir or spruce trees here along the edge. So I want to keep some of that green there. They are green in real life. We don't want to change those like into a totally large yellow looking color, but that'll give us a bit more accurate. For aquas, I'm going to bring to the more blue side to even out those colors between our blues and aquas. And then for the blues, I'm going to bring those to our aqua side at about a -10. And that way, you can see there, I'll reset that. It just brings a little bit of the purple hue out of the sky, which I like to lean towards the slightly more aqua, but not going too hardcore on that. And then down here in the water, you can see some of the aquas, and that are probably on the green side, and we're gonna bring those a little bit more to the blue, and we can adjust those later on here a little bit more. But going too hard on the aquas, on these shady images, might affect the greens as well. For our purples, because we have a shadowy image, I'm going to actually bring those way over to the blue side. And you can see the tint of the image. I'm pointing, but with my mouse here in the edge of the mountains here, there's a little bit of purple in there, and I want it to feel a little bit more blue. So I'm going to bring that almost all the way down to the blue side of the purples. And then we're going to move on to the S in our HSL, which is saturation. So the saturation of all of these colors in the image right now, I feel are pretty good, and I like the way that they're looking. I feel like the blue is quite bright up here, and then I almost want to see a little bit more yellow in there. So again, I'm skipping the reds because we don't have a lot of red here. The oranges I am going to bring up probably to a +20, just to bring some of the color back here, because in the shadows you do lose some of the color, and we have lots of that nice orange foliage here, especially in the larches. I'm also going to bring the yellows up to make those pop a little bit more here in the shadows on the larches. And then the greens I'm going to bring down to maybe a -10. On our aquas, I'm not going to touch the aquas too much right now. I am going to desaturate the blues just a little tad to take away some of that coolness in the image, and as well as affect the sky a little bit here. Just basically as foresight, I'm also going to bring the blues down even more because I'm going to bring the luminance down up there. For our purple and Magneta, I'm going to bring those down to about a -40. I'm just stopped at -38 there to take again some more of that purple, so we have more blue and orange, or the teal and orange feel to it. While it's not very like going crazy or exaggerated, I just want to get rid of the purples myself. Now on to luminance. Again, we don't have a lot of reds, so I'm not going to touch them. We are going to mess around with the oranges here. Luminance affects how bright the color is, and you can see right away how it's affecting that. Because we do have such bright highlights up here on the mountain, we can't get away with as much basically broad adjustments. So I'm going to bring those just a tad bit down so I don't lose all of that color and brightness up here on the peaks. And then I'm going to also adjust our yellow's luminance. I'm just going to bring it up to see what that looks like. And again, we have lots of color being affected like this. So I think I'm going to go for a more local adjustment to affect these ones. I'm going to focus on bringing down the peaks just to keep that color there. So I'm going to go to about a -10. We'll just set these both at -10. And then our greens, we can adjust here a little bit, see what that looks like. I think I'm going to leave it basically at 0. Aquas, I'm going to leave at 0 for now. And then I'm going to bring the blue down to maybe a -15 for now, something around like that. So sometimes when you're adjusting these, you need to go back between the different tabs when you do the different adjustments, just so that you can get exactly where you want to. When you change some things, it changes the saturation, and vice versa when you're moving the luminance and the hue and all that. So you can kind of need to flip back and forth. But for right now, I'm going to leave it as is because I kind of have an idea for what I'm going to be doing with the masking. For our purples and our magnetas, I'm not going to touch those right now. Overall, we have our sharpening up. I'm not sure if this is actually set in Lightroom or if it's just how I've been using it, but I'm just going to bring that kind of down to a -220 here. We don't need a lot of extra sharpening. There's different ways to set exactly what you want to be sharp, just by like I was doing with the blacks and whites, but because the images are all sharp and I do have focus set on him, I'm not going to go too crazy here. I don't see a lot of chromatic aberration in this image, so I'm not going to actually do that today. And then we could enable our profile correction here to Tamron, which is the 20 to 40, which we can flip on and off. This is also personal preference. So you see the adjustment there, it kind of stretches things out, and I'm actually not going to be using that in an image. I like the vignette that it has in here, so I'm not going to be using the profile correction. But again, you can manipulate the image like that and bring it back to maybe what it's supposed to be. From here, I'm going to go straight into masking because a lot of the workflow that I do is based around masking. So this image to me looks very nice. I love the way that the colors are represented here, and I feel like the composition and exposure are all quite strong, but I do want to bring more focus onto our person as well as to the peaks up here. So first things first, I'm going to actually start with just a linear mask here, and I'm going to bring it up from the bottom. This is something I do in almost every single image. And I'm just going to bring down the exposure here. You can see this bright area. There's no detail that we want to really preserve, so I can kind of get rid of some of that. I'm going to bring the highlights down here because that's a little bit bright. If we bring the shadows down, it'll make the dark parts of that part of the image really dark, and since we're doing exposure, that's probably going to be just enough there. Can toggle that one on if we want, and you can see how it brings the eye up to the people in the peaks already. I'm going to do a little bit more of a linear gradient here from the side, probably about the exact same thing that I did over there, slightly decrease the exposure. The highlights are probably okay, and then I'm also going to actually bring down the clarity on this part of the image. We just got to find it here. Just to draw our eyes in, so that takes some of the detail away, and I'm also going to drop down the sharpness on the edge here. And then I'm also going to just go back quickly to our other one and drop down the clarity, maybe -15, and bring down the sharpness at the bottom of the image to draw our eyes up into the area of focus. So that right away kind of smooths out our image here. I'm just going to go back to our main screen, and then we can compare it here by hitting Y. We can see that it's been a lot of difference already from this main image over here. You can see that it wasn't overexposed, but it was very bright in the highlights. It was quite a cool image here. And then also over on our right to our after, we've got a nice evenly exposed image. While a little bit dark at the moment, we'll be affecting that soon with the rest of our mask. But you just hit Y and you're back to your regular image. So to kind of bring a little bit more life back to the center of the image, I'm going to go back into masking and grab my big radial filter here, or just the radial filter, but I'm going to make it nice and big and slightly brighten up the center of our image. Because I've got our mask feather set to 100, this is going to be a nice smooth gradient to it from the center of the image outward. I can probably make this a tiny bit smaller. Just going to sneak that back in there. And that, you can again, I'll toggle that one on and off, and that just brings a little bit more light and color into the center here. We'll see what it looks like if I bring it up even more, but I think just a touch brings a little bit more life into that. We can stretch it out here to bring some more color into this side. Pardon me. And then what next here? So we can touch on our subject, but I'm going to touch him up probably at the end. But next is going to be really bringing the light in from the side of the image. So I've grabbed another radial filter here and I've brought it in from the top of the image, affecting the feather, but I'm going to just make it fairly large over here. Our light source is coming from the left part of the image, and we want to bring a bit more light into this areas of the shadow here. Well, we don't want to bring them up completely. We want to bring back some of that nice color that would, light and color that would pour in over top of the mountain. So I'm just going to do a bit, kind of a broad one here. I brought the exposure up a little bit, and that'll give us a nice kind of just even exposure of this side of the image, bringing that up, but also keeping some of our shadows here. Next, I'm going to do a little bit of a sneaky trick here. So I brought in another radial mask, and I'm going to put it about the same shape, but a little bit smaller, and focusing more on this top edge of where the light is going to be coming in. And right away, I'm going to go and subtract or intersect with a luminance range. So this way we're going to be focusing only on a certain luminance range. So I've hit that and it's focused now on a certain luminance range. I'm going to expand this a little bit to make it the feather a little bit more larger. And now you can see here with the red, we're getting the tops of this, only places where the light is hitting here. And that luminance range is an easy way to select a larger area. So now I'm going to go on and affect what this filter is actually doing. So I'm going to bring a little bit more light into this one. See, popping that, making that light source really glow up there. I'm going to bring some warmth into this to make it seem like it's nice and warm. Because it's getting a little bit green in those blues, I'm going to affect the tint to more of that magenta side to keep that color that I want. Not too crazy, but just up a little bit. And then here's where the magic really happens in this, is by dropping the dehaze to make that really glow. So dehaze can be used as positive to bring back detail, or like this in order to kind of give that really glowy feel. So now we can see that it's affected the shadows a little bit more than maybe that we want. So I'm going to bring that back, affect that a little bit less in that area. And I'm also going to bring up the saturation because we did lose a little bit of color when we dropped the dehaze. So now we can see that that's got a nice warm glow to it. We'll see what happens when we bring that warmth up, which really kind of like that feel as well. Take away some of that blue sky, maybe give yourself a little bit of a morning feel, but I'm going to bring that up to around 70. So now you can see that we've got a little bit of a different look on the image. Nice light coming in over here, and then it's pouring over to this side of the mountains. I'm going to now go up to our peaks and adjust those. I'm going to grab first just a brush and brush over these fairly quickly, and I'm going to bring down the shadows into this area here. You can see just where the light isn't hitting it, it's an easy way to kind of just go over quickly and affect those peaks where there definitely was more darkness before. And that's bringing some detail back right away. I'm going to see what the highlights do there. That is not very natural looking, but if we bring the contrast up, we can make that a little bit sharper. I'm going to paint in a little bit more down here as well, because I know that was fairly dark. You want to be fairly careful with this, but since it's such a big feather, we can go along and make it look quite natural. All right. How are we feeling about this? I think I'm going to go and add a little bit more pop to the color in this side here. I'm going to paint in again along the edge of these mountains, focusing on the orange part where the light is hitting and where it might be a little bit overexposed from bringing up those shadows at the start and affecting our highlights. I'm also going to paint in on these little peaks here, anywhere where the color is kind of hitting, just to like exaggerate that effect that we want from the glowing peaks. Now I'm going to touch up the highlights just to see what that does. It brings back a tiny bit of the color, but since it's fairly bright, I'm not going to go too hard with that. We can try the whites a little bit too, but we want it to look like the sun's hitting it. It's nice and glowy. So I've just brought the whites and the highlights down, and then I'm going to bring the orange up, or the temperature up, sorry, just a little bit to exaggerate that orange. And then I'm also going to hit the saturation just ever so slightly to make that nice and glowy. Some images do have that look to it. As you can see here where that light is hitting it, it's very orange and almost maybe feels unnatural. But as we can see in the original, that light was fairly powerful in there. And because we've brought the warmth of the overall image up to more of a natural white balance, this orange is pretty powerful. And as most of you know from sunrise shots, that light gets that a lot. So let's just look at our overall image here quickly. We've got a fairly nice exposure, lots of good color. I think the blues are a little bit on the purple side up here, so I'm just going to go back to this one mask that I had. That was our sun focus mask that we had affected the tint on, and just bring it down more to our green side. Bring those blues back a little bit. And then I'm going to get out of the masks and just flip back down to our HSL, because I think I want to bring the luminance of the blue down a little bit more and also desaturate it a little bit more, because I like the way that looks. And because we've done that, it seems to have affected it more to that purple side, and I want to make it a little bit more teal. And you kind of can just flip back and forth and adjust as needed. I like that because it was still a fairly dark point in the day. I want that really deep blue up there, and I like how that's starting to look now. Now we're going to go down to our subject and see how we can bring him and just pop it out of the image a little bit more. I see that these rocks down in the bottom here are fairly bright. They have about the same brightness of our subject, so I'm just going to quickly paint in what is along the shore here just to bring those highlights down so that we can focus on our main subject and see how that does. Yes, and so that just brings that sharp whiter look away from them, which gives it a bit more focus on our subject here. We could probably try that here on these rocks and stuff in the corner too, just to bring that down a little bit more. And it kind of makes it more of a flatter look to it. And I like what that's done. While we're in that corner, I think there's a little bit too much detail there because we were shooting down in the shadows, so I'm going to even exaggerate that kind of darker corner even more to match the other side. And then let's see if we bring our shadows down what that looks like. Yeah, a little bit more. And then let's hit our subject select on our mask now to bring up our person. See if it hits it. And so this one wasn't very accurate, so I'm just going to paint it in. I'm just going to delete this mask. I'm going to hit the object, and then I'm just going to paint over our object, which is our subject, my friend there. And I'm going to bring the highlights down because he was pretty bright. I'm going to bring the saturation up because those are going to be the two main ones. You can see it a little bit more. I'm going to bring our contrast up a little bit to make him pop. Then I'm going to go down to our clarity. I'm going to bring that up to about a +10, and I'm going to see what dehaze does. Dehaze is a little bit more aggressive in that sense of saturation, and then I'm just going to touch our sharpness up on that object to about a +10. Now you'll see a lot of different creators are using these tools differently, but that's each their own, and there's different ways to get the same effect. So if you've tried something and got a good result from a different technique, you're more than welcome to do that and add that into this workflow here. All right, so now we've got a new task. So we've got our main subjects, the mountains, and our person down here, but now we want to make sure that we have these larches. It was larch season when we were shooting these, and they are very sought after, so you really want to make sure when you got the larches in there that you're doing a good job of showing off their beautiful color. I'm going to paint all over this roughly because we're going to do a color selection and bring some life back into those guys. I'm going to do this a little bit more closely just so I don't miss any. We've got some down in this spot here. Might as well bring that back. And then so we're going to do an intersection with a color range. Okay, so we've got that selected. And see how well this does. I think I'm actually going to delete the color range, and I'm going to do a intersection with a luminance range just to see if we can get that a little closer. Because the yellow is picking up a little bit more light, we can adjust that slightly easier. And then we can get that selection quite accurate just on the yellow trees. See how we start bringing it away from those parts, we can get a bit of a better selection here. And then we can subtract anything that we don't want. So now that we've got our trees selected with the luminance range, I'm just going to go down here and hit our saturation. We got a little bit of greens in there, that's okay. You can sometimes combat that by adjusting the tint to the purple side to get it to be more yellow when it's in the shadows like that, since we're not on a HSL slider. So now that we've got that selected and we've adjusted it and brought up our saturation and our tint adjusted to make it a little bit less green, I'm going to bring up the highlights on our yellows to get that popping a little bit more, and also the whites just to bring up that nice pop of color to make it really jump out of the image. And then I'm going to just turn on the overlay on this one to see what we're selecting, and then I'm just going to subtract and clean up this a little bit. So I've just grabbed my brush and I'm just subtracting it off the rocks. You can be a little bit more rough with this because you're not going to notice it quite as much. Just in there. You want to keep it basically on every tree that you selected, but get rid of just any obnoxious areas that might really change the color that you don't want to be adjusting. So right now I'm basically taking it off any rocks or center areas that don't actually have any yellow. There are some larches in there, but that's not going to be as noticeable since they're so small. This rock picked it up a lot. And then all through here, just a little bit, I'm just going to cruise through quickly. I think it's just going to clean it up. All right, so let's turn our overlay off and see how that's looking. And that's definitely better on the better side there. I'm going to just go, because I still feel like it's fairly green here, I'm going to go to our HSL quickly. Go to the hues and see what happens if I bring our greens more to the yellow side. I'll move this over. Doesn't affect those trees too badly. And then see on the yellows to the orange a little bit more to separate them from our greens. And then I'm going to adjust the saturation too. Bring up the yellow saturation just to make sure those pop out of there. It doesn't affect the rest of the image too badly, and then we get a little bit more color in there. Let's see what the orange happens when we bring it up. So as you can see, it affects a large portion of the image, so we don't want to go crazy on there. And let's just see what happens when we bring our orange yellows to the orange a little further, kind of in the middle of where we had it. And that's looking pretty good here. So overall, we've got a fairly nicely exposed image. This obviously was in the shadows, so we kind of have a darker image here. I think we might be able to brighten up the whole center of the image just to bring a bit more of an even exposure to the dark parts of it. But overall, I'm really liking how this image is looking. One thing I do notice is that there's still a tiny bit of a purple hue to it, so I'm just going to drop it down a little bit less to the magnetic side of the tint slider. And kind of in the middle there is nice. I'm going to grab another large radial here and just go like this, big over the right or left side of the image. Kind of slide it in there just to see what happens when we bring some saturation or some exposure, sorry, into that side. So that brightens that up a little bit, and then if we bring in another linear from over here, we can kind of bring it in from the bottom so it doesn't affect that whole part of the shadows that we just brought up. And again, bring our focus over to the right kind of third of the image. Let's see what happens. And then again, I'm going to grab one more linear mask and slide it. This one's going to be fairly large just because I want to gradually affect that. And then that's nice, because then we bring those shadows back in, and that is looking quite nice. I'm going to slightly drop that exposure a little bit. But overall here, looking quite nice. And like I said, we're going to affect our saturation at the end, so I usually have it around that -5, but I feel like if we bring it up, we can get a little bit more life here in the image, going from this to this over here. And let's just see generally if we bring the exposure up to how it affects our image. And I think because we are quite dark, I think that doesn't do anything bad to where we're at. And again, you can kind of go through your settings to see where you are. And since we haven't touched the contrast yet, this is where I'm going to make those kind of final adjustments. I think around that 15 range brings in a good amount of contrast. And when adjusting contrast, I like to bring up the blacks a little bit too sometimes to adjust that. And I just make some micro adjustments here to kind of flatten things out. And we don't want any parts that are really dark where we'll use entirely all the detail, but we also don't want any overly exposed image areas. I think that is generally the exposure that I would want to keep. But we're going to go into some very fine details now. So we've touched up basically the main portions of what I'd want to here. Now I'm going to bring back a lot of kind of the detailed areas and bring in the nice extras that we're going to go the extra mile on. So I'm just going to bring up the exposure on that. I'm going to bring up the temperature, really warm. And then I'm going to bring up down the dehaze again. So I'm going to do another subtract or intersect with sky. I'm going to do a luminance range again on that one and make it a little bit softer. And I'm just going to hit the edge of this to see where it takes me, and that is quite nice. We can also do our minor adjustments here if we want to go a little broader, which I think is okay. And then I'm going to actually go back to our original radial and make it really large. Not really large, but a little larger, to see how that looks as we bring in more of this corner here. And that's just softening that up along the edge of the mountains and bringing in what feels like exaggerating the light source. So I think that might be a tiny bit too much exposure, but I like the softer feel here. And then another detail that I want to touch up is just some of these shadows in here. I want to bring a little bit more darkness into those, and we did go over that part of the image before, but I want to bring some more details into this part of the image just to make sure that we have that kind of nice detail here without bringing a lot of extra clarity or sharpness to it, just bringing back, which I believe is dodging and burning in the past, but we don't use those terms as much these days. You can make the brush as big as you need and just go quickly over here. I've only got shadows dropped a little bit right now, but painting in all these areas, because this is definitely the secondary subject in this image, it's nice to kind of bring some more focus onto it without bringing necessarily sharpness. I'm just bringing the contrast up on that slightly, and we can adjust it by bringing the shadows down even more if we want. But honestly, that looks pretty good. You could touch the blacks, but that's generally aggressive. Overall, I'm quite happy with this image. And see, the exposure is nice. We've got a good kind of temperature balance in here. We brought the yellows up in here, and we brought some focus to our subject in the bottom. You can see the comparison here. And for me, I wouldn't really do a heck of a lot more to this image. I mean, you could try and see how the saturation does it, but since those oranges are so powerful, I'm just going to leave that at 0. And then you could also, again, adjust these micro adjustments again. But overall, I'm pretty happy with that. That was a very quick run through of my process of how I attack images. I want it to be no BS, and I just wanted to show you guys exactly my workflow in a way that you can think of looking at your images with masking, showing things like using the radial filters to bring in that negative dehaze to kind of exaggerate the light sources, using the luminance and color ranges to focus on certain areas of the image, as well as the object select tool to paint in our subject and easily select that. Those are just quick ways that you can use the tools in Lightroom to kind of get really nice results. Not all images need to be edited. That's a big thing, that if you don't want to edit your image, you don't have to. But when you're shooting raw, especially if you have a professional camera and you're shooting raw, you really want to shoot for the edit so that you can plan ahead of time and know what you want to do with the edit. Whether it's like this image that we're underexposing to save the highlights, these are all things that you want to think about, and these are all things that I think about when I'm on commercial shoots and personal shoots. And it varies from different subject to subject. So this was a landscape or landscape outdoor adventure image. So we had lots of things to think about. Our main subject, who is my friend down at the bottom, our mountains up in the top corner. But overall, it was a fairly well exposed image in camera, which allowed us to do a lot with it in the final edit. Anyways, thank you guys a lot. The raws are down below if you didn't follow along, so make sure to download those and try to follow along with the video and see how you guys think of my editing workflow. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. But if you want to learn more about exactly how I edit my images, so if you want to see me edit or learn the workflow of more landscape images, lifestyle adventure images, as well as wildlife and automobile images, I have an editing workflow course that I'll have linked down below if you want to see more of that. Or you can shoot me a DM on Instagram. I'm always happy to chat and answer any questions you might have about editing. And you can find my Instagram at dusty.cressy. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys learned something.